I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you guys about building the design to development workflow and the Toolstack in 2024. But before I do that, I want to introduce our amazing panelists. So I'm going to kick it off with Mark first.
Hey everyone, my name is Mark Figueredo. I run design operations. It's a little team of one here at T. Rowe Price for our retirement plan services. If you're at the last webinar, I was there too. So awesome to be back and chatting with you, and absolutely amazing to join this panel of other amazing operators. And thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you all today.
Thanks, Mark. Teresa, you're next.
Yes, hi, I'm Teresa Slate, she, her, hers. I work at Northern Trust. I'm the head of design operations there, just like Mark, I am also a team of one. So super excited to talk about design to dev handoff. It's something I actually recently did at my organization. So it's very near and dear to my heart, this topic.
Awesome.
So excited to be here.
Can't wait to hear more about that. John, how about you?
Hi, everybody. My name is John Calhoun. I'm calling from San Anselmo, California, and I work at Salesforce in our product design operations team. Not a team of one over here. We have a team of about 15 or 16, not all in product ops, but been doing this for about 6 years, and thank you.
Welcome. And last but not least, Brandon Perry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon. I do design operations and tooling strategy at Zendesk. I'm coming from the Bay Area of California, and software tooling and applications is near and dear to my heart. So I'm happy to be here and share the stage with you all.
Awesome. I'm so excited about this today. I think, just kind of kicking this off and starting with an overview is that right now, design ops professionals need to evaluate their design and development processes and build a tool stack that facilitates that process. And so today, I really want to dive into looking at what does this process look like, who's involved, what jobs are to be done, how tools play a role. Also, kind of diving into what some common pitfalls and limitations are related to the tool stack, especially cross-functionally, because I think that's something that a lot of us really struggle with. I know that I've seen a lot of those questions popping up on the DesignOps Assembly Slack channel, so want to get to those. And then also taking a look at how we measure if our process is good, what metrics matter, and what vitals do we track, along with other challenges that design ops professionals are facing in the current economic climate. Is there a need for design ops now more than ever, especially in the past year with everything that we've been seeing? So I want to kick it off with the first question, which is kind of laying out the problem of what we've got here. And I think for whether or not you're a team of one or you're a team of 15 or 16, like John, I think we're all going to have some input on this. And so one thing is that our tools are honestly 10 times better than they were 10 years ago. I think a lot of us who have been in this can see the evolution over time, but what we're still dealing with is the same business problems within product organizations. There's misalignment, there's slow shipping, there's lack of clarity, there's compromises to workflow. And so I'm just curious, you panelists, what do you think is the root cause here?
I mean, I can start if that's okay. I think a big part of it is that, we've seen the tool landscape change a lot. We've seen, it going from being your absolute, have to use foundational tools. Anyone who's back in the day, it was all Adobe for a really long time, or for my Axure friends, there was only a handful of tools out there that you could kind of use. So over the years, we've seen a lot more pop up. And I think what we're starting to see is each one has a specific need, and then a new one will pop up that meets like another need but does a very similar thing. And then we're just kind of watching more and more kind of come up. It's like, well, yeah, we do that, but we have this one feature that's a little bit different. Yeah. And a lot of the times it's kind of filling the gap of something that we don't necessarily have. And so a lot of the times I think we're just looking for the right tools for our teams, regardless of the brand name or whatever it is. Does it have the features we need to do and help our teams what they're looking for? I think the biggest and hardest part of it, honestly, has just been that there's just so many out there. And how do you pick one that is going to grow with you and your team, and not just, unfortunately, some of them die off a little bit after some time, or they don't get their funding or whatever it might be, and you look for something else. So it's just, I think the biggest thing is just finding the right thing for what your team needs, which goes into some of the conversations I know we'll have around just team needs assessments, and how do you make sure you're picking the right tool for your team versus just what's the new shiny thing.
Yeah, and I think the new shiny thing is something that we are kind of always kind of like, it's like kind of like whack-a-mole, right? We're like, does this work? Does this not work? Some people want to try it, some people don't want to try it. I know, like in my history, I always give everybody the option to kind of try all the tools, but then there's at some point it's like, okay, we got to rein things in, like who's really using what, why are we using this, and kind of what's the purpose? And so, John, I kind of want to talk to you about this, is that like, specifically the workflow of design teams and development teams are very different, right? And especially as a place I can only imagine at Salesforce, even more so. Design is so fluid. Engineering is milestone based. How do we work with that? How do we work with those like two constraints? And how do we help kind of both sides of that equation?
Well, I think answering that question kind of makes me think about what I believe the root cause of the problem is. It's not just that we have all these different tools, but it's also they exist in a very complex world with complex organizations. So like a company like Salesforce, we have many design teams. We have many businesses that have their own design teams, right? We just have the organizational complexity. And even within a single design team, we have multiple roles, right? A motion designer needs different tools than a prototyper. We see people who are skilled at prototyping in code versus prototyping in Figma, say, right? Like, so all these tools exist in a world of organizational complexity, right? And I think what happens when you are working in complex orgs is you have communication breakdowns, right? Yeah. If you're just a single designer, can swivel your seat. And if anyone was ever a designer in that world, where you could swivel your seat because you're the only one, talk to an engineer. It didn't matter what tools you were using. The communication was there, right? And so I think ultimately it comes down to communication barriers. And so when I think about the right workflows to overcome that, to me, tooling is important, but even more important than that is considering it in the context of how do you communicate across design and dev functions, and how do those functions communicate across across each other. And for me, it's like, get the tools in place, but also build in rituals and cadences. Like I think no tool is going to be a substitute for good communication. And I think good communication starts with DesignOps building the right rituals and cadences that bring design and dev together. Not just at the handoff point, because I don't believe in handoffs. I believe in like hand holding, but from end to end, the entire experience or the entire product lifecycle, right? So when I think about that, it's like a kickoff, right? Nothing can take the place of putting people in a room, even if it's virtual, and talking through the problem, and so that everybody has an understanding, and so that designers and devs are both engaged and motivated to provide solutions. Having milestone check-ins regularly so that everybody's aware of the progress. Having celebrations so that there's some empathy for our small invisible wins, both on like content design, interaction design, engineering. So like the celebrations are just important. So kind of rat holding comms and communications, but I think you have to go hand in hand with your tooling strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Teresa.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add to that, where I feel like, we're talking about tooling, but and one of the big things in my practice and process is we have to develop a process first and a ritual and a cadence, and the tool will enhance it if we already have something. But if we don't have something, it's just going to make it worse. Yeah. And so often, when doing evaluations for tools and things like that, I will start, before we get the new shiny thing, start very scrappily. Like, okay, we have Microsoft Office. What can we do in Microsoft Office? What is the process that we establish? And why is it not meeting our needs? So now that we have a process, we know what's not working. We can actually go like eyes open and evaluate what it is we need, as opposed to like plugging holes based on like what we think is kind of going on.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is like we as design ops people are kind of always talking about process. And I think some people can perceive that as slowing things down, not speeding things up, even though we're like trying to be efficient. We're trying to put things in place that will speed things up, but there's kind of that perception, right? Of like, oh, well, if we have to do a process and we don't do it our way, then, well, it's just going to take longer. Brandon, I want to hear your input on this. And like, how do you, everyone knows I'm like kind of like hitting them up. I want to know, like, how do you deal with this on your team, and how do you sell in kind of the tools that you're using or the processes that you're trying to use to get people all on one stage, so that way we can speed things up, not slow them down?
Yeah, so I think one thing that came up for me, I think around last year, we had a number of different tools that were used at different stages of the design process, from like whiteboarding to design to handoff and whatnot. And one thing that we were hearing from the team was like, hey, we want to use a new solution that was hot and people were really excited about, but it was brand new and it wasn't really tested and it wasn't really as mature as I would have liked.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of benefit to at least like illustrating what the current state was and kind of showing how, for a 100-person design team plus developers plus other stakeholders, showing the experience of going from like 3 different tools and all like the knowledge that is lost from one tool to the next in terms of handing off like comments, handing off like different pieces of feedback and having to replicate those same changes from tool to tool. We saw lots of things break and a lot of things just not really be preserved. So we're able to illustrate this process where if we would at least like after identifying that current state, moving to one tool that could do most of those things with some bugs, that just saved a lot of time and it saved a lot of money as well. And we just like kind of multiplied the cycles of the times that would be happening over the number of people that would be performing that kind of broken process. So that immediately had a lot of wins for us, and that helped us with, I guess, like selling the new solution that required a lot of buy-in and a lot of implementation to make happen.
Yeah. I'm looking as the chats come in, and I think there's like a really interesting side conversation. I think a lot of people hate the new Slack redesign. So we could talk about that too. But I think one of the things that is really interesting is this conversation around communication and where people communicate. Peter was one of the ones that kind of brought it up. It was like, okay, you've got all of these tools, but how do you communicate with them? So I don't know if anybody wants to chime in and figure out like, have you found the way to like communicate this? Is it all in one place? Is it one place for certain things, another place for other things? Like, what does that look like?
I'll take the first stab at it. So I think I'll use it in kind of 2 parts. One, I guess the part of communicating is just like the communication that we are using this product or this tool and how to is something that I think is very important, especially if you're bringing something new in with team members that aren't. So like in this conversation, you have your design teams who are utilizing these tools and using them. And then when you're working and handing that off or handshaking with your development teams, they may not be tools that they're using all the time. So I think first and foremost, a really important part is making sure that you are communicating how you plan on using those tools. So putting yourself in their position, right? And saying, okay, here's how you don't need to know how to use all of it, but here are the really important features that you do need to know. So in a really good case of this, I'll use Zeppelin as an example. That's what our team is using now.
Yeah.
When we go in and we have our process for how we move something into Zeppelin, right? We talk about annotations, we talk about our comments, we talk about everything they need to know. We actually did, we recorded it, but we do a session. Anytime new developers come in, we have kind of a demo video that we run through with the teams so that they understand how we will be using it and how they will be using it. So we talk a lot about the features and how we're doing that. So when it comes down to annotations, especially around interactions or ADA or anything else, they know where to go and where to find that. Same thing with pulling down code. Beforehand, there wasn't good communication. We had our developers that were retyping content in our product designs. And we were like, you actually don't have to do that. You can copy it right here and you don't have to do extra work. And it was one of those things where it was just like, oh, okay, I didn't know that was there. So a lot of the times it is communicating the features of how it works and then just making them understand how it's going to work well for them. But as a team, making sure that you're doing that and you're doing that in a similar way. So regardless of which product or dev team you're working with, it's a similar experience. They don't have to learn new features depending on the teams that they're working with.
Yeah.
So just making sure you're all aligned.
Yeah, no, I love that. Anybody else want to chime on this? Because I got another question after that. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I'll try to go quickly. I think this is a great opportunity for DesignOps, right? If we can codify the rules of communication, of feedback, of where those details, both technical and experience details, are kept, then we not only make it easier for that design to dev handoff, but we also democratize design and development for teams that might be based in multiple time zones or around the world, right? And so one of the things that I think is critical about DesignOps is we can like put on our thinking caps and think, hey, what about designing inclusively? Like, could we design our processes inclusively? So as an example, if all feedback has to go in Figma or Zeppelin or as a comment in a Google slide, but you codify that way of thinking, that means that no matter where you are in the world, even if you couldn't attend a meeting because it was 12 hours or 12 and a half hours if you have teams in India, you can still read the same feedback. You can still feedback on designs. It doesn't matter where you are. And I think that's something that we need to be thinking about as design ops practitioners, is how we can be setting up the rules of communication to be thinking more inclusive about the global teams.
And so we don't lose the knowledge somewhere, right? Because Jules just kind of brought this up. Jules, big shout out to you for bringing this up. I think there's this thing where some people are like, oh, well, I prefer email and I prefer Slack and I prefer putting in, this tool or that tool and whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, everything's everywhere. Do I have to go everywhere to look for this? Where's the knowledge? What if somebody put something really important somewhere and then somebody put something important other? So like, I guess the question for me is like, is this like I think, John, you kind of nailed it. This is like a training opportunity for design operations people to like, kind of like help train the team to be like one location, one spot for all of this, or like feedback only goes here, everything else goes here, or something like that. So that way you don't miss anything, which I think it's kind of terrifying because there are so many tools right now, right?
I think you'll hear from your teams on that too. I mean, at a certain point, designers will get sick and tired of having to go to 7 places to do one job. And I think it'll be the same thing for your development teams too. It makes their jobs even harder. So bringing it all together, at least having reasoning on why it is in certain places, not just because that's how it's always been done, but really reassessing where things are and why they're there, I think is a really important small exercise any team can do. You don't have to absolutely redo it, but just ask your teams how they feel about it and they will surely tell you.
Yeah. And I always think like, again, I think there are going to be outliers. We all have those folks on our teams that are like, well, I don't do it this way, or I prefer to do it this way. I think because we all struggle with that, I would love to hear from you all. Like, how do you handle situations like that? And how do you persuade somebody who is very convinced that it needs to be done their way and it's not going to mess up their process to kind of join in with the rest of the team and, I don't know, be a team player?
I think it's definitely an aspect of onboarding that's important. When folks come to the team, that is like their, couple weeks, let's just say, like that's their window of time to really learn how things are done or how XYZ tool is done at XYZ company. And that's where DesignOps comes in and is able to own that process of making sure that this new person, whatever their role, whatever their discipline, they're able to do it in ways that are consistent with how we do it there. I think like for folks that are just like, I only did it my way at my company that I'm no longer at, like those folks are always going to exist. And it's just a constant training opportunity. And, you want to definitely reward the good behavior from folks that are actually just pushing the envelope and doing things well. But if there's an individual person that is really just like slowing things down, then there's other things that we can do behind the scenes to kind of make that happen. But it's definitely tough.
So when we were in the middle of doing this transition, and I think my cohort who was on here doing it with me, we often quote, I don't know if anybody watches the TV show The Bear, but there's a whole episode in the first season about keeping your side of the street clean, right? And so when we met resistance from people, there's a couple of ways. One, I'm like, just humor me, have some fun. The second thing is about everybody loves to blame somebody else. So we're like, if you establish this process that the rest of the organization is doing, should something go wrong, it's not going to be your fault because you followed what you were supposed to do. And so like we've had some success in that with some personalities of just saying like, by doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, by following this process that's similar in the rest of the organization, it takes essentially the weight off of your shoulders because you are using your time solving important problems, but then also nobody can point to you because if you leave a piece of feedback in email and everyone's doing it in like Figma, which is what we use, then everybody's going to immediately point that out. So, that's a bit of a cheeky way to, I guess, apply it.
Yes,
but everybody loves to blame someone else. So
yes, chef. Yes, chef. I feel like there's a new t-shirt coming out. Mark, we got to add this to our t-shirt list. We're totally launching a Yes Chef t-shirt because that is genius. Props to Teresa for bringing that to our attention. Okay, moving on. I can't believe we're already 25 minutes into this. I want to talk about workflow and tooling solutions. When you think about what's urgently needed to optimize the product development process, some might say it's time to focus on the design to dev process next. But we ran a community survey with Zeppelin, and I'm sure all of you were bugged and bugged and bugged and bugged and bugged again to take the survey from us. And thank you for those who did. But the findings showed us that not solving design to dev challenges results in a decrease in design team motivation. Like 73% of the people said that. 68% said it was a decline in design productivity. And 52% said it was a delay in feature launches. So the report, like the actual annual state of the DesignOps benchmarking report, is coming out next month, but just kind of having these like little nuggets in our brains right now. Teresa, I'm wondering, what do you think is going on and why do you think this is? Are you experiencing these challenges in your org?
Yes. So we're definitely experiencing these challenges. And I think the not solving it leads to all of that because you just get burned out, right? We're all kind of like stretched to the max. And when you're not necessarily kind of like following like a process, or there's frustration in the design to dev handoff, people are just tired of kind of explaining themselves kind of over and over and over again. And also feeling like, I feel like I just do a lot of media references. Like I talked about feeling like Mugatu from Zoolander, which is like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because it's like, we've had this conversation, we made this documentation. I think too in our organization, which probably is not unique, is we also include product in this handoff, because some of that misalignment and miscommunication is because like dev and design are having a conversation, and then dev and product are having a conversation that's different than from what the conversation design had. And so we're also trying to move like our product owners into that same arena, because then it's like you have so many small conversations that are not happening in the same place, and people are just getting frustrated, burned out. Features get delayed because changes happen and they're not easily communicated. So that's kind of like, that to me is like what we're seeing, and what the biggest cause of burnout is just like, I have to keep talking about this. I feel like I've talked about this and things aren't changing. So we just need to solve like how we can do this better.
So you think the number one kind of consequence of all of this is burnout from your teams?
I mean, it's burnout, it's poor quality products. Like it's kind of the not getting it right is essentially the worst case scenario. So we talk about this often is there's burnout from your teams. You're going to have high turnover. That's like the people side. And the product side is like, they're just not going to be quality because things are changing so much. You're also not going to be able to build in any efficiencies, right? So when I think about, we use a design system, not getting this right, if somebody's like not using the design system or part of the program, it just degrades everything and then creates like confusion in the marketplace. Like, I don't know, it's just a really big flashpoint for kind of everything that could go wrong.
It's so fun. John.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and not only does it degrade the experience, like if you look at it from the business side, it just doesn't make good business sense to have inefficient design processes.
Yeah.
Over time, you're going to accrue design debt, right? And that's going to show up either as like a bloated experience, bugs, lack of accessibility, the inability to innovate, right? Like no business wants that, because it's going to put them, behind their competitors, right? And so if you believe, as most companies do, that design can be a competitive advantage, not having efficient design processes means you're just not being competitive. So like some people, if you're having trouble getting stakeholder buy-in, the dollars and cents make a little bit more sense, right?
Yeah, but you gotta prove it, right? Like,
yeah,
I think the one thing that I keep seeing over the years that I've been consulting now is there's a lot of companies out there that are like, we got to get to our OKRs, we got to get our ROIs. Like, it's like every acronym in the book, we got to get to it, got to get to it, got to get to it by the end of like the 6 month and the year mark. And what happens is, as long as they hit those goals, everything seems golden. And it's like, how do we get them to understand that things could be even better and less of a struggle if we did it right the first time? And like, that's something that I don't know if any of you guys are like facing, or like, how do you advocate for that in a way that like people are going to listen?
You have to look at, this is where like metrics come in, right? So one thing that we're exploring right now is like, the reason that they're able to meet those is because they're only looking at I'll say if our organization using Agile is only looking at those productivity and like velocity metrics
Yeah.
to the detriment of everything else. And so
Yes.
one thing that I'm starting to push for and starting to explore is, well, how do we also measure like product effectiveness? So what does it look like that not only are we closing stories, but our clients and customers are finding value in it?
Yeah.
We're releasing something quality, because if we're not looking at that other side, connecting with, you know, we have like an experience insights team. If we're not connecting with that, like, you can launch stories all day, but if people don't find value in it, it's never going to go anywhere for your business. So again, it'll stall, and you'll be that much closer to being disrupted by somebody else who's doing it better.
I totally agree with you. Do you have, I'm sure there's people on the call, I'm curious about this. Like, how do you like gather those metrics, or how do you like introduce that kind of thinking into your organization, or like, where do you even start?
I mean,
I'm
you can
talking
always,
reset.
yeah, I
I'm
mean,
like,
you can always
Oh,
start.
okay. So I'm like,
No.
I was like, where we're at right now is we are lucky enough to have an experience insights team, which does product analytics and consumer behavior and like sentiment analysis.
got
And
it.
because that is contained within the design organization, I mean, it hasn't been made yet, but I have somebody who I can talk to and say like, okay, I want to start measuring product effectiveness. I want to bring this up to like our C-suite executive. So tell me about what that means and how do I get there? And then on the other side, I've been running a project about how we start to measure product quality at an enterprise level. And the idea being at like, look at our spend, look at our velocity and our terms, but then look like, okay, what are our metrics of quality that are coming out like based on a set of criteria next to, we'll say NPS score for now, but that's not what we're going to use. Like, and those two together, like, is this where we're targeting? Because if not, then that means we definitely have inefficiencies because we're like burning through money, but not having anything to show for it. So that's like high level there. But if you aren't as lucky to have like an analytics team, I mean, even starting with a basic heuristic analysis and saying like, look at our heuristics. So you're closing these stories. I'm doing this heuristic. This heuristic is not matching up. It is not something that's good. Then something's got to change, right? Like, it's a small way to start.
Yeah, I was just going to mention there's even some stuff that was right before you said it, Teresa, around if you don't have those groups or those departments that can help you do that. There's like two things I like to use often. One is just called second order thinking, which just kind of takes your initial thought process to the next level. And you kind of break that down. It's similar to like the 5 whys or things like that, right? You give yourself a problem that you're coming across, and then you kind of like, okay, I'm going to change tools. Okay, then what's going to happen? Okay, then when you do that, and then what, right? And you can start kind of building those out, and then you can even start to kind of give yourself like where to begin from just doing a small thinking exercise like that. If you have no idea where to begin, because you will start to uncover, because if you're in operations or ops adjacent or a lead on a team or even on the team itself, and you're the mouthpiece for the team, you've heard the problems over time, and you can start to pull them out and then help yourself dive in a little bit deeper, because it can be a little overwhelming if you think about all the problems that are happening, because there's always something there. But you can use small little tools like that even just to help you kind of give yourself the first 3 steps or first 3 things to work on, and then you'll find that it makes it easier and you can build upon it from there.
I love it.
I think it's also important when you're trying to think about how to measure design to dev excellence is don't boil the ocean, right?
Yeah.
We have at Salesforce a lot of products, and some of them are old, they're legacy. And frankly, they're difficult to instrument to measure things like time to value or time on task. Like, these are good measures, but it's just hard. And so if you're really kind of looking to get under the hood and measure like how good is the design of this product, go seek out the newer products, go seek out the more nimble products, seek out a single feature within the product, right? Put on your design thinking cap, right? And start to ask yourself, like, how would I pilot this process? How would I beta this idea, right? Don't go after the whole space altogether, because you're going to bring yourself out. But find a small group or small dev team that's interested in also learning and understanding this, learning and understanding about how they are delivering, and work with them. And from there, you can expand it. You can learn, innovate, take what you've seen in the past and tried and build it out to something new in the future.
So in that same vein, this is going to be a meaty conversation, I think. But for the last several years, a ton of organizations have benefited from like free dev seats and design tools to get like basic spec info, right? So like you're like kind of like what you're saying, right? It's like try something out, go with like a certain team. But now that gaining efficiency in design to dev transition is, I keep saying design to dev like in like one slur, I'm sorry. But But now seeing that transition as an area of focus to improve product experiences and product time to market, there are several vendor solutions on the market that are coming, but they are all at a cost, right? And so I'm just wondering to you, like, what's the cost versus the benefit of this new approach? And like, how are you handling it? Brandon, I'd love to ask you this question.
Yeah, so I'll point to Figma. We use Figma at Zendesk, and it's definitely been a really interesting journey of growing with our instance of using it. It's expensive, as we know, and over the past couple of years, like they've added like quite a few really exciting and great products that come with a price tag. And one thing I've seen, like working with our contact there, is just the business strategy of releasing a new tool or a new feature as a beta.
Right.
For 6 months to a year before launching it officially, gives a lot of time for teams to get, a lot of ambient buy-in and a lot of interest of just like, hey, this is a feature. We think it's going to be really cool. It does, these 5 things that are really, really important that we've identified. It's available now. And kind of having to navigate, a group of folks that see the feature in the tool, but don't see the dollar value. And us as DesignOps professionals having to see like, well, if we want to implement this at scale, that's like 3, 4, 5 times the budget for that specific tool. So I always like look at the dollars, and I have to have like lots of different conversations with our design teams around, well, let's try and do like a scale, a pilot program of just getting like, hey, who's really going to be using this on a regular basis? Let's get those folks in, but not kind of explore a enterprise-wide deployment. I've seen lots of other tools that grew really, really fast internally and then had to be cut in half or abandoned for a cheaper solution, and that just creates a lot of other downsides that no one really wanted or no one was thinking about at the time. So one thing that we kind of do at Zendesk is like really adopt a wait and see approach with a lot of these tools. Our developers are getting on pretty fine with the in-house tools for just inspecting designs as it is right now with our design seats. Dev mode seems cool, but we're definitely going to take the approach of maybe piloting it at a later date once a lot of the bugs and a lot of the usability things have been sorted out with companies that want to be on the bleeding edge. So kind of delaying the inevitable a little bit, but still like making the move when it makes a whole lot of business sense, and not just saying like, hey, this is a very expensive thing, some people really want it, and then just saying, hey, let's go, because we can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that before I ask the next?
I mean, I just want to say the specificity point, because that's where we're seeing a struggle, right? So our design to dev organization, it's probably at like 20 to 1, if not 40 to 1, right? So we don't have the budget to bring everybody on for dev mode, but there's also this belief that everyone is a full stack person. So getting the specificity of like, who's going to use this? Like, what actually is it going to be used for? And for us, it's like, again, just like John said, finding that like pilot or influencer team, say influencer, because they move nimble, but other people in the org have to want to look to them for what they're doing, is really helpful in that respect. So yeah, that's how you kind of find the budget, and then you can start to compare and contrast like, hey, this is how well that they did it with these tools. Like maybe we should think about rolling it out, but yeah, you can't kind of boil the ocean. Especially for us, it takes about a year and a half to get through procurement. So that's our thing too, is like, it's got to be worth.
Yeah,
like
that's a whole other level that we
for
haven't
that.
even talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on that real quick, I think a really important thing that you can do or should do is when you are bringing something in is letting people know what the cost actually is and like what the levels are. So like I have to do that often with Zeppelin because our developers are very involved in there. And when I'm asking, do they need a dev view or do they need a view only seat, right? Most people are like, oh, dev seat. I'm like, great, here's the cost, here's the features. So I've even broken that down now where I am asking someone, okay, when you're asking for a seat, here's the breakdown for you. So you have the information you need to understand that it does cost us money. This isn't free. And to use your best judgment based off of where you are. And I can upgrade you at any time. But if you only need something for right now, that's going to benefit us more. It's similar with Figma, right? Everyone wants a Figma editor seat, but then they never use them. And I'm like, cool. I'm going to make you view only for now. You can still be in here. And if you need a seat, then you can request it. But let's not start off at, $450 or $900 a year for your seat. Let's start off with the zero money for the year. And then, we can reassess as we continue to go on. So just communicating that up front, I think, to anyone who's not in the business of that tool is really key as well.
Yeah, I love this love-hate relationship. Like, it's like, we love telling people like all of this stuff, and then we hate telling people all of these prices and all of this stuff. But it is really good education, because again, I think everybody wants to hop on the hot new thing or whatever everybody else is using, or it works a certain way and that's great, but people aren't thinking about, the implications. In our survey that we did, it said 27% of the people we're like, I don't even know where I'm going to get budget for like more tooling. And 25% were like, okay, we're going to do it, but we got to like figure it out. You guys just highlighted a couple of approaches that we could use in terms of doing that. That also looks like that's a lot of like monitoring on your end and a lot of like auditing on your end. If like, do you have like some sort of like, I'm going to say process for like how you go about doing this and tracking people, but also giving people the opportunity to explore. Because I feel like money and creativity, like you don't want to, like, you're kind of like pulling at two strings. And so like, how do you approach that? And other than just financial ways of saying like, this is how much it's going to cost. Like, do you have any tips for folks who might be dealing with this and how they could talk to their teams about this in a way that might help them understand the implications a bit more?
Yeah, something I like to do with my teams is let them know that, for their budgets for each year, just assume to spend 10 to 15% more. And that tends to cover, what happens as, course of doing business with vendors. They tend to just increase the budget for things, but also just baking in increased capacity. We're continuing to hire more people, we're continuing to have people come in and out. So just planning to have more can be like a good starting point. And I think something else that helps when it comes to like, I guess, arbitrating over seats and who gets what is being clear that, if you belong to a certain cost center, here's what's available to you as a starting point. And we codify that in policy, make that part of onboarding and so on. And really give a couple different paths for people to say, hey, like, while you don't fit the criteria, here's what we can do to, dole out some seats or dole out access for the thing that you need to do. And, if there's a really strong need for that kind of growth, then we go to our leadership team and make the case for them. But I think like definitely not having an open door policy of just like having someone think, oh, I should just have this because I'm cool, or I'm going to do this one thing, and just kind of going and running wild with it. So that just requires, a lot of administration that hopefully we don't have the capacity for, which is always like a tough thing, but it's part of making sure that we run these tools effectively.
I see a lot of nodding. Anybody else want to contribute to this conversation, or is Brandon just like, yep, nailed it?
We often will give people to Office 365, give them alternatives.
Like, we're not in a situation where we're able to really increase budgets too much. So we've been focused more on the other side of the house, which is like cost reduction. And I think it's an opportunity for your DesignOps processes to also become enablement and learning opportunities for the other functions that you work with, right? So if you say, hey, PMs, all feedback on designs is going to go in Figma or it's going to go in Zeppelin. And guess what? You can use a viewer license for that, right? Is an opportunity to train those people. If your developers are asking for editor licenses, no, you say in the handoff process, we are going to, have these milestones, but guess what? If you're a dev, you don't need the full editor. Like, you'll have not just the tools you need, but additional tools, right? And so the processes you build out can also build out the learning. And I think, if done right, it can keep the costs down to a reasonable level. Yeah,
I was going to just mention that sometimes on a lot of these products too, you have kind of a little bit of an area where you're not paying for it instantly. So depending on, like for Figma, right, you have a quarterly true up if that's the plan you're on. So a lot of the times if someone wants access, now it does take a little bit more of that administrative part that Brendan was just talking about, but it's like, you know what, I'm going to give you editor access for a week and see if this is something that's going to work well for you. And I'll just make a job. I'm a big bullet journal person. So like, I'll make a note for next week, right, to check on them and see if they're good. Or Zeppelin's another great example of, yes, I'll go ahead and give you a dev seat. You know, I'm like, you have 2 days to figure out whether you need this or not, right? And then I can roll you back if you need to. It's a little bit more responsibility on your part, but it's almost like that bit of a free trial, but you just have to remember to roll them back so you don't go too far. But that's another way too, that you can just be like, try it for today. Let me know if that works out for you. And then if it is, great, you know, we can do that.
Yeah.
Or again, have a process in place that makes sure that their manager or whoever else is actually approving those seats, not an individual who just stumbled across it, you know, reading an article somewhere. I think that's a really important part too. Like, make sure there's a chain of command or an approval process that you make sure is in place, and it takes a lot less of that responsibility off you at the end of the day.
I love that. Okay, I can't believe we're already at 10:45, so I'm going to go with another meaty question, and then we can start taking questions from our audience. I want to talk about future facing. What challenges are you facing in your current role in DesignOps in your organizations that are due to the macroeconomic environment that we're kind of facing right now? Brandon?
I'll go first. I'll go first. I think one thing specifically regarding tooling and design operations is like this really large call and consistent call to rationalize and really slim down and streamline all the different things that we're using. We've been talking about this entire time, but just like finding ways to justify and guide people down the process of, you know, pre-pandemic era of just like having all the different tools you want, all the different plugins you want, all the different things, and kind of pointing to, we can't afford all those things. We have a lot more, I don't want to say regulation, but basically regulation around like making sure that we're using secure tools and not just like running around with anything that someone made last night. That's always just going to be like a big thing for this era that we're in. And I think like design operations folks can really step in and help with navigating that change. That's definitely not something that, at least like my design team is like having the capacity to really focus on anymore, and just really focusing on what we can prioritize and make sure that we continue to grow and expand and figure out how we can just slim down what we can too.
Do you think, because of the environment that we're in, and this is going to be a really controversial question, we've seen a lot of people in DesignOps community being laid off. This is being seen as like a nice to have role, not the vitals. But we've just sat here and had a 45-minute conversation about the importance of all of this stuff and how it makes things run faster and how we're like actually optimizing financially for these companies. I think we're all biased when we say that, yes, of course, we think DesignOps should still exist and it's going to be this big thing in the future. You guys are on the ground. You're seeing that. What's some advice that you could give to people right now who are currently in this ambiguous time, and how to advocate for the role within their companies, other than the points that we all just made here right now?
I would say that I would focus on the force multiplying effects of DesignOps. I think a lot of times DesignOps headcount gets seen as like an addition to a team, but I believe it's a coefficient, right? It's a multiplier. And you need to focus on how one DesignOps person can make 20 designers act like 24.
Yeah.
That measurement is going to look different in every team. So you have to figure out what the right measure is. But to me, that is the real value of design operations, is that it gives time back to designers. It increases or decreases the time that designers and devs are spent haggling over details. It reduces design debt, right? And so focus on those force multiplying effects, and then I think hopefully your organization will hear you.
Any other words of wisdom before we wrap up and go to the Q&A portion?
Yeah, I always something I talk about when making products or even like design operations a thing is make it seem like their idea. Like find out what their pain points are, ask those questions, understand that, and then when you're making those changes or you're putting those things into place, you can communicate that, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you're solving my problems, you're doing that.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of in both spaces, both when you're making changes for products, but piggybacking off what John said just now, right? There's a force multiplying effect to when you have someone who can actually focus in on those problems and you don't
Yeah.
have everyone else scurrying around trying to do that. So it's like the definition of design ops, right, is allowing your practitioners the ability to use their skill. And a
Right.
lot of the times what we're doing in ops is not necessarily the skill, right? Designers should be focused on that, not
Yes.
worrying about procurement and getting seats in there. However, a lot of people start at that level doing that because they actually have an interest in doing that. So a lot of times that could also be a really great instigator to get you into that ops space more, because you also just happen to love process and procurement and security.
Yeah. I mean, you had me at process. Two things. One is that, Elliot, we're going to make sure that this recording gets sent to Mark's team so they can all hear him say that they all think it's their idea when it's really his idea. I think that would be really great way to roast Mark. And secondly, just a quick shout out. Last year we had, I think 54% of the folks that came into the design ops practice were actually designers. And this year we're pulling the data literally as we speak for the next benchmarking report. And so I'm going to be really interested to see what that percentage looks like this year and seeing that transition happen from design ops, because Mark is right. People like process. What did you say? Process. You said two other words.
I said procurement security, but no one likes
Yes.
that part. But if you, I mean, the thing, I just say everything that most designers don't like, I do.
VP.
Yeah. Instead of people process, it's people process and procurement now. Another t-shirt idea.
Not another t-shirt idea that we will be running up.
I think another quote that I'll attribute directly to Mark, because he's surely the only one who said it, is that I think he said, like, all designers, they're doing design ops somehow, somewhere, especially if there's no dedicated design ops process currently. So that's just something I think that tends to get designers, the ones that like the process, into, like Mark, into like the design ops world as well.
Yeah.
It's also too, when that happens, like helping the designers learn their value, right? It's a little bit of therapy. That's like, hey, just because I'm helping you organize your files does not mean that because that's off your plate, you're any less valuable. Like, we've hired you to do the hard work of like coming out with those complex interactions. So your creativity should be spent there, not figuring out how your files are organized. Like, let me do that. That's what I love to do. It's my jam.
We pay you to design.
Yes.
Like, we pay you to make the user experience better, not to do all of the other stuff. And if you're doing a lot of that other stuff, like, maybe you're in the wrong job or you need to advocate for design ops person. So, and if you are in that role right now, speak up. That's what design ops people are for.
Yeah, let Teresa or let Zeppelin organize your design files. That's what we're here for.
Dude, it's my favorite thing.
It's ours too. Okay, so we can hop into Q&A now. I'll go with, I think, the top upvoted question. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can. You can also upvote your favorite ones as well. I'm not sure if you touched on this a little bit, but the top question is, what are examples of good metrics for design to dev excellence? I know this is something that can sometimes be kind of nebulous and not have like a tangible number assigned to it.
I always go with design debt, right? It's just the number of design quality of life issues that you couldn't address and had to roll over from one release to the next, right? Because that ends up being something that once you start to accrue that debt, you can't ever pay it off, and it just drags your performance and your product's experience down.
Yeah, I would say if there's anything that you're finding that your teams are spending a lot of time on, no one likes time tracking necessarily, but if you have an area of that that's really problematic, ask your team just to tally that down, right? How much time they're spending on that, and that can be a piece of data. That's what we did with our QA process, was really bad, and so our team has been slowly just saying, like, here's how much time I'm spending on QA. How can we make this better? And then I can just take that data point, to whomever, instead of being like, oh, track it all, track this little bit that's a problem area, and then you can hopefully look to improve that number over time, which then shows that you're doing your job, which makes you keep your job longer because you're an asset.
You're an asset. That's another one.
I would say too, with like tracking the time is great. I've also really been pushing this idea like perception is reality. So even if it's not like how much time are you actually spending on that, how much time do you feel like you're spending on that? Or like for the design to dev excellence, our big thing is a lot of cycle time. Like how long does it take to get from like requirement to design and then design to development that you're satisfied? Does that feel like it's a long amount of time, a short amount of time? Because even that feeling is like what's leading to that like churn and burn as well.
Sorry, I had to not laugh at what Mark just put in the chat.
That's what I was thinking too, just like that. Mark and I have been on like a t-shirt roll for a little while, just so everybody knows. So this is our inside jokes are external now.
Next question. How are panelist teams, so the panelists here, using tools to ensure quality, intent of design carry through in dev implementation? I guess this is kind of along the, does the design always match the product type thing?
If your team has a design system, I'd say one of the ways that you could use your tools effectively is to make sure that the design system is making it all the way from the discovery process to the delivery process, right? Like where the tokens carry through, was the spacing carry through, are the headers correct all the way through? I feel like if you have a design system, and I hope you all do, if you focus on design system accuracy in your tooling pipeline, then you're going to get that quality as a result.
Okay, next question. No one else. Let's see. Will design systems approaches from Brad Frost to Google's keep relevant in, I guess this is a design system question, so good segue by me and by John. Will that keep relevant in 2024 as a way to find efficiency between designers and developers?
Yes. I want to have a whole thing that's like defensive design systems and people like really ragging on them lately. They serve a purpose, right? And the purpose is that just like we do in operations, it's helping take off some of those, please excuse me, but we call them like small d versus big D design activities. And like the design system is like, we want you focused on those huge and complex interactions. And when a design system is like poorly defined and executed, it becomes that things are carbon copy, but that's not the case. And I think people are responding to the design systems in that. They'll continue to be relevant because you need a way for things to be cohesive, not only within your suite of products, but also in products across digital experiences. So like, I think they'll still happen, but we do need to know that design systems aren't useful for every single product. And I think some people are like shoving them in where they don't belong. But I will say, especially on my end, coming from legacy and enterprise, like, yes, absolutely design systems will be relevant, continue to be relevant. They might get rebranded something different, but that's what they're going to be.
For sure. Okay, let's get to I think we get two more questions out of here real quick. This is another question from Peter. Reviews are an important communication moment and require both processes and guidelines and tooling. How do the panelists feel teams can best be supported to perform reviews?
Is this reviews like critique? Sorry, that's why.
I think so.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm trying like rereading it myself right now. I'm like,
yeah.
Which
Yes.
way?
Yeah, Peter says yes.
Okay.
I mean, I think part of it is kind of bringing in, if you're in design, you've been through critiques and design process and everything else like that before. Anyone who's not been a part of that process can sometimes be turned off by it because crits can be critical. But if you're doing it the right way, it can be very positive and effective. So I think if you are going to be bringing others into that process, especially with developers or other people, then I would just maybe reshare what that process is, the purpose, and what the goal that you're trying to get out of that is. And that way everyone's on the same page going in and maybe doesn't have different perceptions of what a review or a critique is. You can just kind of reset the stage for everyone and then go into it all on the same page.
Yeah, I love that. We support our teams by having rules of engagement stated up front, right? Like, what is the right way to bring up feedback in this forum? What are the kinds of feedback the designer is looking for is very important, right? Don't go rat hole on something that's not relevant at the moment. Stating up front where the design is in terms of like exploratory to final, right? Which necessarily means the review has to be a little bit more specific at that end. So ultimately for us, we've found that having good rules of engagement up front and making sure everybody's aligned to what those values are is really important.
Yeah, and to add to that, using the same platforms to conduct those reviews. We had a couple templates in FigJam that just had a lot of those things set up so that people are kind of seeing like where that stage is, what they're expecting, and it's all just like templatized, just to make that process of setting up each review cycle much easier and much more able to be repeated.
Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap up from Scott. Your last name is intimidating to me, but I'm going to try to pronounce it. Miodaszewski is what I'm going to go with. He's on a UX team that supports multiple development teams. Each dev team uses their own tech stack and tooling. Do you have any suggestions on how to get the dev teams to align so that UX can align with devs?
So I always like to point that before DesignOps, there was DevOps. And so if that is something that exists within your organization, find out maybe who those individuals are, and have conversations with them. And if it does not exist, maybe introduce them to a great new term and then talk about how DesignOps and DevOps can work together. And then you can really kind of make those conversations start to happen. But that's usually where I find that those conversations will start. Even if DevOps doesn't exist as its own individual team, it does a lot in the tech leads. And you can just find out those individuals and bring them together into a singular room and have that conversation and talk about maybe the negative effects that your design teams are having with their multiple tools, or maybe how you could help make that process better.
Okay, well, everyone, thanks for joining us. Again, if you want to keep track, excuse me, of what Zeppelin and DOA are doing, the links are in the chat. Thank you to our amazing speakers, John, Teresa, Brandon, Mark, and Meredith. Really appreciate it. It was great working with DOA again. To wrap things up, we've actually got a quick 2-minute video we'd like to share. This is something that kind of came up a little bit design system related. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Here at Zeppelin, we just launched our second product a few weeks ago called Omelet. So if you're interested in design systems at all, feel free to stick around for that. I know John said something kind of poignant. He said something about like, does the design system carry all the way through the process to ensure like design to development quality? And that's something that this product helps with a lot as well. So stick around for that. Otherwise, again, thank you to all the speakers. Feel free to hop off the stage whenever you're ready. Not to kick you off, but we are at time.
And we want to see Omelet. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks again. Thanks again, everyone.
Hey there, my name is Josh, and I'm excited to walk you through Omelet, a component analytics tool that eliminates manually measuring your design system usage and helps speed up decision making for component library improvements. All I need to do is run Omelet's command line tool here, and Omelet will parse your code repository and get component and prop usage information. Typically, scanning your code base takes several time-consuming and manual steps, but Omelet takes care of all that for you. And just like that, it's done, and we can take a look at the results here. At the main dashboard, the first chart I see is our overall adoption of our core library over time. But I have several more useful charts right out of the box that give me immediate insight into how my design system is used, such as most used components from my non-core library, you might refer to those as custom components, or least used props. Now let's take a look at the chart showing core versus custom component adoption by project. And I can quickly see which projects or teams are adopting our design system. This is a starting point to understand why one team may be adopting your design system more than others. And of course, from here, you'll have your own questions, and we can answer those by creating your own custom analysis. For example, if our design system has 2 versions and we recently released version 2, I want to know which projects have adopted version 2 or are still on version 1. Omelet makes it easy to analyze my projects. I can filter by tags that I've created, and I have these custom tags for each design system and then break them down for comparison. And now here we have a full view into the design system adoption by version across all my projects. Looks like this project hasn't started adopting version 2 yet. This one is at 28% adoption, and we're looking good with full adoption of version 2 on this project. Omelet not only analyzes your design system adoption, but is also a catalog for all your components and props, whether they're a part of your core design system or custom. Part of my job is to keep track of recently created components, and I'll take a look at a new component here and see where it's used. Now I can get a full view into the dependency tree for this component, and I can see its relationships and can make better decisions on why this component was created, if it should be officially adopted, or determine if it's redundant. I can also get insights into how props are used across my components. So for example, if I see that there's a prop that isn't used in all of the times that this component is used, that's a good signal for me to remove the prop completely and simplify the component. Omelet not only gives me insight into components props, but also which values are sent to each prop. I can use this information to make better decisions on what to add, remove, or adjust in our design system. And that's only a little taste of what we've been cooking up with Omelet and the kind of detailed look into your design system usage it can give you. Omelet is free to try, so have a bite. And I've actually been told not to do any of these egg puns, so I'm kind of taking a big whisk here. So check it out, make improvements with confidence, and bring quantifiable insights that help demonstrate the value of your design system.